Welcome back to our sixth episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dale Dyer. In this episode, we'll be discussing Dale's journey from Boise, Idaho to his bomber air base in England where they flew combat missions over Western Europe, his experiences during the war, and some of his combat stories while flying these missions. So without further ado, sit back and enjoy this latest episode. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Thoughts in History from a Centenarian with Dale Dyer. We left off last time in our last episode. Dale was in the Air Force and had been an instructor for almost a year in Smyrna outside of Nashville, but had finally been transferred to Boise, Idaho, and picked up his crew that he was going to be flying combat missions with there, and they want to be training for a couple months. So we'll pick it up there. So Pop, you train with them for a couple months and all. Where do you want to go from there?
Recalling an incident or two, we had been up flying one day, and our period was over, and we left on a bus to go into town for the afternoon. And as we crossed the end of the takeoff and landing strip, one plane went right over our head coming in landing, had evidently kind of a midair and had knocked off half of the tail of his plane, and he was really fighting that thing, trying to keep it under control, and he evidently made a safe landing with it. We were real impressed with his ability. Anyway, after a couple of months there and everybody getting their job and knowing what they were responsible for, they shipped us out to New York area, and we boarded the SS Brazil, the boat to go take us over to England, and it had been an Emerald Seas cruise liner that my wife and I had been on a trip to the
Bahamas. The Bahamas. Yeah, but this was years later after the war was over.
Yes, that's right. But that's been a cruise ship before we got on it there, and then they'd renamed the thing the SS Brazil.
Converted from a cruise ship to a troop carrier for the war effort, take troops overseas and all, but then got converted back to a cruise ship afterwards.
That's right.
Yeah.
Anyway, the thing normally had somewhere around 750 passengers plus the crew on board as a cruise ship. We was 5,000 aboard that plane, that SS Brazil, and we were stacked in a two-room, normally room that was normally for two people. There was 21 of us stacked in there with all of our gear, and only half of us could get in bed at any one time. It was so crowded, and anyway.
So how many bunks was in these staterooms or rooms, whatever? How many bunks were in there?
Well, they had 21 bunks in there.
21 bunks?
From the floor up, just enough room to squeeze in from one layer to another, and we had to have to use half of that area to put all of our gear that was duffel bags with whatever we had to keep with us.
So basically, you had 21 bunks, but you can only use maybe half of them, 9 or 10 of them.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so we had to take turns sleeping, and it was quite an experience. And the ship had to be blacked out, and you couldn't have the portholes open, and the air conditioner, the air that's come in the room got blocked off by some of the other rooms. They wanted more air, and so they blocked it off, and it was just so stuffy we'd have to go up on deck and sleep on the floor, upper deck at night. It was a 6-day voyage across. It wasn't the largest group of ships. It was the second largest, they said, during the war. Every place we could look at, we could see nothing but ships around us. And they had destroyers and so forth cruising out ahead and on the side to keep submarines from torpedoing us.
For protection for y'all.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, we landed at Ireland about midnight. In time we got on the train and headed to our base that they were in Britain. And anyway, it was probably 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning before we got there, and they fed us, and we went to bed. And about 8 o'clock, 2 planes come right down low over our barracks and buzzed us. And then right following that, 1 plane came down, and he came so low that there was a power pole right beside our barracks, and the top of that power pole caught his horizontal
Stabilizer.
and sheared it off, and he went out about a quarter of a mile and into the ground, and it killed him. And that was our introduction to the war zone. And in there, we found out that he had just finished his missions and was visiting his buddies in one more flight that he wanted to go with them before he would come back to the States. And
So he made it all the way through all the combat missions, and then
got killed.
Wow.
Right there when he was supposed to be headed home back to the States.
Well, backing up just a little bit, you said you landed, y'all's ship docked at in Ireland. Was it Ireland that y'all actually docked in?
Yes, we docked in Ireland and rode the train
From there down to England.
England
Yeah.
to where they shipped us. Then we was there hardly a day, and then they flew us back to Belfast, Ireland, to a field 7 miles out, and we were right in the farming area, and they were harvesting, and they was using scythes and pitchforks to harvest and stack wheat and had to stamp it out. And they were 50 years behind what we'd been accustomed to here in the States. So they didn't have the big machinery or anything. It's all hand harvesting. Well, then we were sent from there to Belfast, England, where we were stationed with the 458th Bomb Group of the 8th Air Force. And our field was just on the north edge of town, and in taking off in one direction, we went right over a part of Belfast. So we went through some training missions there, flying out over the North Sea, English Channel and so forth, but staying away from Germany. And finally they signed us, we started to fly our missions then. And
now the base that you were actually stationed at in England, was in Norwich, if I'm saying that right. Is that right? Norwich, England, which was on the east coast of England.
It was northeast of London, about 75 miles.
Okay.
Less than what it is from my home now to Atlanta. But around us, there was 14 air bases in a 15-mile radius, and each of these air bases had from 60 to 65 planes on each base. That whole 2nd Air Division was right in that area of Norwich. And the 1st Division was out west of that area, near Cambridge, and that was all B-17s. The 2nd Air Division was all B-24s. And then there was a 3rd Division, which was down closer to London, and they were all 17s. Well, we finally flew our first mission, I believe in August of that year of 44, and that was after D-Day. And that first mission, you didn't know what to expect. In fact, is that folks in one of the rooms where we were stationed, the 4 officers lived in one room, and it was a kitchen of a officer's home before the war, and we just had bunks in there. And the boys in the bedrooms and the other parts of the house, they come to visit us right after we got in there. And as they left, one of the fellows says, "Well, we sure hope you have better luck than the last 3 groups that was in that room, that kitchen." Says the most any one of them flew was 6 missions before they were shot down. So that was before we even flew our first mission. But our first mission, flying in formation, and they were V formations, a lead formation and a high right and a low left and a lower up right underneath of the lead 3 planes was the 4th. So that made 12 planes in this section that you flew together, and then there was 4 of those sections, generally speaking, that made up the bomb group. Well, just as we approached our target, just as the bombs started, we started dropping the bombs, my co-pilot was looking at the plane on our right, and it got a direct hit. We were in heavy flak, and it was all around us. And it blew up, and I told the boys, "Watch and see if there's any parachutes that come out of it." And he said, as it went down, they never did spot a parachute that opened. It must have killed them or stunned them, or they just wasn't prepared for that, or it just it took their lives right there. Well, my co-pilot, everything about him was covered up except around his eyes with his helmet and the oxygen mask on, and he turned toward me, and he was as white as a sheet, and he claimed after that it scared him so bad he didn't remember even returning from that mission. And that's what he claimed after that.
You know, yesterday we were sitting there after lunch talking about the experiences and stuff, and it was interesting to know that there was, I guess, quite a few of your crew. I don't know if all of them experienced it or not, but what we would classify today as post-traumatic stress disorder. But back then, y'all really didn't know what it was, and a lot of the guys suffered from it. But you, for some reason, never suffered from dreams or nightmares and stuff like that of what went on during the war and all.
I've been so fortunate. I just can't thank the Lord enough for what how He's handled me and provided for me. Well, anyway, as we had to reach, at the same time we lost an engine as that plane blew up next to us, and we couldn't stay in formation at 23,000 feet with the load that of the plane, with all the fuel we still had, and we had to drop out of the formation, and I tried to stay underneath of the rest of them for some protection if the German fighters saw us, they'd pounce on us. So, but we finally got back in formation, and they started letting down back towards England, and we landed with them, and it was the boys were so happy that we made it. They jumped out, and we got stopped and leaned down and kissed the old earth.
Kissed the ground.
So thankful that we made it on our first mission.
Well, yeah, that was quite an experience on your first mission, losing an engine like that, and then having to drop out of formation. But at that time, what was your altitude? Do you remember?
Well, we were at 23,000 feet when this took place.
So you had enough power to obviously continue and make it back, but because of losing one engine, you really didn't have the ability to, with the load that you had also, to stay up at that altitude. You had to drop down.
Right.
And it wasn't pulling enough to keep you up at that altitude, but once you come down, you was able still to make it back to your base and all.
Well, our crew, my navigator had been an instructor, and of course I'd been an instructor as a pilot, and they soon, as we flew 6 missions, and then they put us as a lead crew, and when as a lead crew, we were leading a flight or a wing or something, and we usually had a colonel or a major flying in the co-pilot seat, because he was in charge of if anything come up that we had to change targets, so forth. He was the one that made the decision, but he wouldn't do any flying hardly at all, in all the missions, and the missions were usually from 6 to 8 hours on a mission, and they sit there and never get out of the seat, and it's so cold because the plane was wide open, and the temperature of one mission was 60 below zero, but most of them were 40 below and maybe a little bit more than that in most of the missions at the altitude that we usually bombed from.
And getting, before you move on, just to let our viewers know, of course, this was back in the 40s, and the planes, by today's standards, were extremely primitive. You really didn't have an autopilot that could fly the plane.
Yes, we had autopilot.
Well, you had autopilot, but it wasn't nearly as sophisticated as it is now. It's basically, it'd keep you straight, but it didn't really keep it at an altitude or anything like that.
No.
You had to keep it that way.
And the 24, you just had to manhandle the thing.
Yeah, because
they finally put boosters on it after about halfway through our missions. We finally got a plane that had a booster, and it wasn't near so hard to keep the thing straight and level.
Whenever B-24s too were somewhat notorious because they were high-winged airplanes, and you had that not T-tail but double tail on it, so it would, compared to the B-17s of the era, they just kind of wallered whenever you was way up at its almost service ceiling, 24,000 feet up there in that thin air. It would just waller, especially with all the weight of the fuel and the bomb load that you had on there. So it was quite a workout to keep that thing going and keep it between all of the other planes that was in the formation around you and not hit one of them. Like we were talking yesterday about how you had to keep it at a steady altitude and a steady speed, and that's a whole lot harder for our viewers who don't know. That's a whole lot harder than you might think in a plane to do that and all.
Well, anyway, while we was over there, and in between missions that we would be assigned to, we didn't fly one mission right after another. We normally had 3 or 4 days before the next mission, but during that time, they had me assigned, and every day just about, I was in a plane, and I'd have to take it up, and we did practice bombing, a lot of that on a barge that was in a bay area. They're 100-pound practice bombs that you could see the smoke where you were hitting, and that was coordination between the navigator and the bombardier and the pilot to get good accuracy on that. Then other days we were having to go and pick up other planes that had been damaged and had to land at other fields that had been repaired and brought back, and we had to take planes up and gauge their airspeed with a set course on a railroad track, a straight course of about 10 miles, and they could work and check the time and the speed that we were reading and what it worked out to be, to check that. And then if a plane, the pilot, co-pilot had to bail out for a reason, and before they were allowed to fly anymore, they'd assign them to me, and I'd have to take them up and check them out and see if they'd lost their nerve or if they was still proficient in their flying. And that was another job that they kept me at all the time.
So basically, even though you might not have been flying combat missions, you were still doing a lot of flying, practice and different other things, ferrying.
Every day, just about, if the weather was fit at all, they had me up doing different things.
Practicing, ferrying planes, going picking up personnel at other bases and stuff like that and all.
Yes.
And then there was still missions that you flew that you didn't get credit for, like we were talking about yesterday, that you didn't get credit for because maybe you flew over to England, but the target was covered up in clouds and you couldn't drop the bomb, so you had to bring the bomb load back. So you didn't get credit for that, even though you went through the same thing, dealing with the fighters and the flak and everything else, like on any other bomb mission. So you've actually flew several more missions, like you told me the other day, than the 25 or 26 actual that you actually got credit for, right?
That's right. And then after the Normandy invasion, we were assigned, they took us off of combat for 2 weeks, and our base was assigned to haul gas down to France, and they loaded us up with GI gas cans full of gas in the bomb bay and the waste in the plane. And I was the second plane to take off from our base with that load. They had us way overloaded for what the plane was supposed to be built for. It was 56,000 gross weight, and they had us loaded up 72,000 gross weight. And the plane that took off ahead of me finally got it off of the ground and went out of probably a half a mile past our airbase perimeter. It went in, and we don't know what actually happened, whether he brought all these flaps up it wouldn't fly. It wouldn't maintain altitude if you brought them all up. It was just so heavy. So it was one big explosion, and they said about 4 houses were consumed
Taken out.
in the flame.
Yeah.
And then 30 seconds later, they called me and says, "You're next." So I took off, and I had to start turning to stay out of the big fire that was right in line with our runway. And we flew down to France and had to land with that overload because we didn't spend much time or use much fuel out of our tanks. We had 2,700-gallon tanks on our plane, plus all those cans of gas. But we got down there, and
You was basically a flying bomb then.
we were, and we made 4 of those trips, I believe it was, during that time.
Now, the bases that you landed on over in France, what kind of condition were they? Were they paved? Were they dirt runways?
Well, they had been paved fighter bases, which didn't have long runways as what our bomber had available for us. And
Much
we
bigger.
lost a lot of planes
Yeah.
on that gas haul.
Because they couldn't get, if they made it up and made it over and landed, sometimes they couldn't get stopped in time, and they would go off the end of the runway and crash there and all.
That's right. They'd go through fences and hit ditches and shear their landing gears off and then blow up. It was pretty terrible. That's what we lost in planes in 15 months of combat over there. We lost 99 airplanes from our base alone.
From your base.
And each one of a lot of the other bases even lost more than we did. So it was a pretty terrible, costly work that these boys were involved in, all the soldiers and airmen that we had.
All right, well, we'll bring this segment to a close. I'm trying to keep these a little bit shorter than 40, 45, sometimes 50 minutes. I'm trying to cut it down to about 20 to 30 minutes, so we are right at our 30-minute mark. So just want to thank everybody for watching our YouTube channel, and we just hope that you keep watching it. If you do enjoy it, give us a like, subscribe, because we're going to try to keep this going and not have such a long period of time between segments. So trying to get some content going again. So again, thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for watching, everyone, and if you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like below and consider supporting our channel by clicking on the subscribe button as well. If you have any questions or suggestions for content, please leave a comment below and we will be sure to read them. And to be notified of any new uploads, turn on notifications at the upper right hand corner of your screen, and we will see you in our next episode.